Hello everyone. Welcome to this class on communication skills. Today, we'll explore why communication is a cornerstone of your success as a data science student, and also the essential skills you need to thrive in this field. So by the end of this video, you will understand the importance of communication in data science, key communication skills critical for your professional growth, and real-world examples of how effective communication elevates your role as a data scientist. So I would like to start by telling you all, communication bridges the gap between data and decision making. So basically equipping you to collaborate effectively in multidisciplinary teams. So let's dive in. Now, if you may ask why communication matters in data science, what does communication mean in the context of data science? It's the ability to translate complex data insights into clear, actionable information that stakeholders can understand and act upon. So let me highlight 3 reasons why this is crucial. Number one, bridging the gap between data and decision makers. Imagine you've uncovered a significant trend in customer behavior using machine learning. Now, if you can't convey this insight effectively to your marketing team, it might never be utilized. So, communication ensures that your findings lead to decisions. And the next one is collaborating in multidisciplinary teams. So, as a data science student, you will often work with engineers, product managers, and business analysts, each with different expertise. For example, when explaining a predictive model, you might focus on accuracy metrics for engineers, while emphasizing return on investment for business leaders, right? So the third one would be to enhance career prospects and growth. So as data science students who communicate well are more likely to lead projects, interact with clients, and progress in their careers. So employees value professionals who just don't analyze, but also explain their findings clearly and persuasively. Now, I would like you to think back to a time when you struggled to explain a complex idea to someone without a technical background. Now, what could you have done differently? Think about it, right? So, the next one is your key communication skills as a data science student. So, communication skills are a mix of written, oral, visual, and interpersonal abilities. Now, I'm going to break this down for you all. So, what is written communication? Writing, let's say, example would be writing a technical report on a machine learning project, right? So, you got to use clear language, structured sections, and visuals like graphs to highlight the insights, right? Now, when it comes to oral communication, presenting findings in a team would be a good example. Now, here you will be using analogies to simplify complex concepts, right? So you got to compare a neural network to how the human brain processes information. The next on the line would be visual communication. So an example of visual communication would be creating a dashboard to highlight the KPIs for stakeholders. So you got to choose the right chart type. It could be line charts for trends, bar charts for comparisons, and heat maps for correlations. The next, interpersonal communication, which is an important aspect of communication. Now, take an example of you aligning with a marketing manager on campaign goals based on data insights, right? you will have to practice active listening and basically paraphrase their needs to ensure alignment. Yeah. So let's look at a case study. Now, as a data science student who's analyzed customer churn for a subscription service, right? Initially, they presented findings using terms like logistic regression coefficients, but stakeholders, they did not just understand the impact. So later, they used a simple bar chart showing what churn rates mean before and after campaigns, right? So the company acted on the data and basically retained some customers that quarter. So also this demonstrates how simplifying your communication can drive actionable results. Okay. Now here's a question for you. How would you explain a data set with 10,000 customer transactions to a non-technical client? Okay. So I would like you all to think about it. Moving on to the next one, it is data storytelling and visualization. So let's learn one of the most impactful aspects of data science, which is storytelling and visualization. So here we'll be focusing on how to use storytelling principles to present data insights, choosing the right visualization for your data. And lastly, the tools and techniques for building compelling narratives. So I'm going to explain all of these principles. First, let's understand what is data storytelling. So basically, it's the art of using data to craft a narrative that resonates with your audience, right? Guiding them from problem identification to actionable solution. So I'm going to break this into three key principles. First would be understanding your audience, right? So how would you understand your audience? You got to tailor your messages based on your audience's technical expertise. For example, if you are presenting a regression analysis, right? So to analysts, you can emphasize on the statistical rigor, but to the executives, you got to focus on the business outcomes. Let it be like ROI or customer retention. All right. The next principle is you got to frame the problem, the context, and the solution, right? Now, every good story answers three questions. What is the problem? Why does it matter? And how can it be solved, right? So, for instance, in an e-commerce project, frame the problem as, why are we losing customers? The context could be seasonal trends. Yeah. The solution might involve targeted discounts, right? And then you got to structure the narratives. How do you use a simple framework for this? You start with a compelling fact or a question. For example, did you know our churn rate increased by 15% last quarter? Now, again, the problem here would be to outline the issue, right? And what would your insights be? Your insights would be to present your findings. And lastly, you would suggest an actionable step, right? Now, also here, I want you to think about a recent project. How would you explain the problem, the insight, and action to your audience? Okay, moving on, choosing the right visualization. So, what is data visualization here? It is a graphical representation of data to effectively communicate patterns, trends, and insights. All right. Now, how do you choose the right visualization? You got to match the charts to the data. All right. So, if it is a bar chart, That would be best suitable for comparisons like sales across regions. If you're going to choose line charts, that would be ideal for trends over times, like monthly website traffic. If it is going to be a scatter plot, it would be perfect for relationships like marketing spends, West ROI. And heat maps would be great for showing destiny or correlations such as customer activity by time and location. Also, try to avoid clutter and misinterpretation. Okay. Now you got to use clear labels, consistent scales, and simple color schemes. Okay. Try and avoid as many pie charts with as many pie charts, also with too many categories. Bar charts often work better. So try to use bar charts wherever you can. And the tools that you can use, Tableau, that would be excellent for creating dashboards. Python with Seaborn or Matplotlib would be ideal for custom visualizations. And Power BI, useful for enterprise level reporting. Okay. So let's say you're presenting a sales data over 6 months. You can always use a line chart for trends, bar chart to compare region specific sales. All right. And the last one would be to build a compelling narrative. What's a compelling narrative? It is the one that connects data point to real world scenarios, right? Making insights relatable and actionable. So there are some techniques by which you can do it. One is connecting data to the real world scenario. Let's say, for example, if customer churn is increasing, link it to its factors like pricing changes or customer support quality. Now, that's how you relate or you connect data to the real world scenario, right? And then you can use analogies and metaphors. Example, you can always explain the neural networks by comparing them to how human brain processes information through interconnected neurons, right? And an example of data set demonstration would be, so let's say a data set showing sales trends by product category. Okay. So a good visualization technique would be to use a stacked bar chart to display total sales. Now you can break down each product's contribution here. All right. So let me ask you again here. If you had to explain this chart to a CEO in 1 minute, how would you structure your explanation? Now, you got to think about your approach and also reflect on question like, what's one data set you have worked on that could benefit from better storytelling, right? How would you structure it using the hook, problem, insight, and an action method, right? Okay, so you got to think about this. Now, moving on to the next one, which is technical communication. All right. So, what is technical communication? It is a critical skill for translating complex concepts into clear, actionable information. Now, what are we going to cover through this slide? The structure and the components of effective technical reports. We will also be covering best practices for documenting code to ensure collaboration and maintainability. And strategies to deliver impactful technical presentations. All right. So let's start with how to write clear and impactful technical reports. So first, let's understand what is technical report. It is a structured document that communicates data findings, methodologies, and insights in a way that is clear and concise. Okay, so let's break those down into a few key components. First and the foremost is your structure, which will cover an executive summary. Okay, so what is an executive summary? It's a brief overview of the problem, your key findings, and your recommendations. For example, let's say our analysis shows a 20% increase in customer churn, primarily due to delayed responses in customer service. Okay, moving on to the next one in the structure would be your methodology, that is the approach and the tools used. For example, you can always say, we used Python with Pandas library to analyze customer behavior over 6 months, right? And the last would be your findings, which is to present data insights using tables and graphs. Now, always use clear labels and captions for visuals, all right? And also, as you conclude your structure, make sure you summarize your findings and suggest actionable next steps. Okay. Now, when you're formatting a report, use bullet points and numbered lists for readability. You can also include tables and diagrams to visually present complex information. And let's say I want you all to think about a technical report you've written or read. Now, what section do you find most challenging to tackle? All right. So pause and reflect on how you would approach it in a different method. Okay. And then moving on to documenting code effectively. So, what is code documentation? It is the process of adding comments and docstrings to make your code understandable and maintainable for others, right? So there are a few best practices here. First would be to write clear comments. Focus on why the code exists, right? Not just what it does. Okay. Now, instead of writing a hashtag, right, this sorts the list, you can write hashtag sorting the list to prioritize high value customers. So you got to understand, not you got to focus on why the code exists and not just what it does. All right. And also, consistency is the key. So you got to consistently follow naming conventions, formatting, and structure. All right. So I want you to think about a project you worked on, right? Let's say if someone new joined your team, how would you explain one of your functions? All right. So this is another important aspect which you got to think about. The next one is effective presentations for technical audiences. So what is a technical presentation? It's basically about simplifying complex thoughts and highlighting actionable insights for your audience. All right. So there are 3 strategies again for this. You got to simplify complex algorithm. First, try and avoid jargons. Use analogies. Okay. So let's say a random forest algorithm works like a group of experts working on a decision, each contributing to their opinion. All right. So try and use analogies as much as possible and avoid jargons. Also, you got to back your claims with evidence. All right. Use data to justify conclusion. Now, instead of saying our model is effective, show the graph comparing model predictions with actual outcomes. All right. And the third one would be graphs and statistics. Always choose visuals that align with your audience's needs. Okay. So try to avoid cluttering the slides too much with data. Okay. So let's say you're presenting a machine learning model for predicting customer churn. Now, for a technical audience, you might show the confusion matrix of the model. But for non-technical stakeholders, you'd highlight the ROI, right? So you can simply say by stating this model can save the company, say, $200,000 annually by retaining its customers. All right. So always take a moment to simplify the term. Now, no one's going to understand a random forest algorithm if it is a non-technical audience, right? So what analogy would you use there? Let's walk through an example. Let's say I'm presenting you with a small scenario here, predicting sales trends using a linear regression model. Okay. Now, for the analysts, you can always show regression line and explain its slope. But for the stakeholders, you got to simplify it as this model would predict sales and it will grow by 10% if we increase ad spend by, say, $500. All right. Now, how would you achieve it? You would introduce the data set and the model, show the result using clear graph, and explain the insights and its implications. Okay. Now, have you ever struggled to explain a technical concept to a non-technical person? Also, how did you handle it? Now, if you haven't encountered it yet, how would you approach it now? Right? So, technical reports should be well structured with clear visuals and concise language. And your code documentation, it should ensure clarity and maintainability for collaborators. And lastly, your presentation matters a lot. You should adapt to the audience using simple analogies and evidence-backed visuals. All right. Okay. Now, moving on to the next area of focus is presentation skills. So here we will explore how to craft and deliver presentations that would leave a lasting impact. So you will learn how to adapt your presentation to different audiences, how you use visual aids effectively to enhance understanding, and handle question and answer session confidently and manage stage fright. Okay, so let's dive into the first key concept: tailoring your presentation for different audiences. So how would you do that? First, let me make you all understand what does it mean to tailor a presentation. It means adapting your content, your tone, and delivery style to meet the specific needs and expectations of your audience. Okay. Now, there are a few strategies to keep in mind. First, you got to understand your audience. So let's break these into three type of audience: the executives, peers or the technical team, and clients or the non-technical stakeholders. Okay. So when it comes to the executives, focus on high level insights and business impact. Let's say, for example, instead of explaining how a model works, highlight the ROI. Yes. So this model can save 500,000 annually by improving customer retention. Yep. When it comes to peers or the technical team, dive into the methodologies, the algorithms, and technical challenges. Okay. So, for example, you can always show the confusion matrix to explain a model performance. All right. And when it comes to clients or non-technical stakeholders, simplify the technical terms and use relatable analogies. All right. So you can always compare, for example, data pipelines to a factory assembly line to explain the ETL processes. Okay. And then use storytelling to captivate the attention. Now, here the structure would be like you start with a hook, followed by a problem, an insight, and the solution. Okay. Now, a hook could be a question, a fact, whichever that you may want to choose. All right. Now, I'll give you an example. Imagine our sales are dropping in one region and we do not know why. Yes, by analyzing the sales trend, we found the competitor discounts were eroding our market share. And here's how we solved it, right? So think about a data set you worked on, how you would present it differently to an executive versus a peer, all right? And then jot down all of your ideas using the hook, problem, insight, and solution methodology. Moving on, you would be using visual aids effectively. Now, what are visual aids? They are tools like slides, charts, and dashboards that help you present complex information clearly and effectively. Now, let me go over some do's and don'ts. All right. So, try to use minimal text, stick to bullet points. All right. And include relevant visuals like graphs, infographics, and ensure consistent fonts, colors, and layouts. All right. And when it comes to the don'ts, don't try to overload the slide with text or extra data. All right. And avoid distracting animations or fonts. No, that's definitely a no no. Also, do not include too many visuals without explanations. All right. And try to incorporate infographics and dashboards, right? So you can use dashboards for interactive presentations. Let's say an example could be a Tableau or Power BI for live filtering and insights. Okay. You could use infographics to summarize data for technical audiences. Let's say, for example, you can show market share trends with a pie chart instead of a table, right? So, yes, so also maybe you can think about a slide you've recently created and what could you simplify or improve to make it more engaging. Okay, now moving on to the third segment, how would you handle question and answer sessions? So, what is a question and answer sessions here? It is part of your presentation where the audience asks questions to clarify doubts or explore your ideas further, right? So there are a few strategies for success. The first one would be to address challenging questions. So you got to stay calm and listen carefully, right? Now, if you're unsure, always say, that's a great question, but I'll need to follow up with you on that. All right. Do not mess it up. Okay. So, also staying calm under pressure. Take a deep breath before answering. Okay. Reframe negative questions positively. So, let's say, while the initial results weren't as expected, the model improved significantly after tuning. Yes. So basically, you are reframing a negative question positively. All right. And always manage the flow. You got to repeat the question for clarity, right? To ensure everyone hears it. Okay. Also, try and use transitions like, hey, that's an excellent point. Let me add to that. All right. So you can use a lot of transition questions like this. All right. And the last and the most important thing, overcoming stage fright. So, what is stage fright? It's that nervousness or that anxiety you feel before or during a presentation, right? So, there are certain techniques to build confidence. Let me give you a few here. However, it varies from an individual to individual, all right? But there are three things that worked for me. So, let me share that with you all. One would be your breathing exercises. Practice deep breathing, right? Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds, and exhale 4 seconds. All right, that would be your number one exercise. Number two, mental preparation. Visualize yourself delivering a successful presentation. That in itself is a victory there. All right. So always visualize yourself delivering a successful presentation, which would calm your nerves down, at the same time would push you forward and motivate you. Sorry. And the last would be to present mock presentations. Rehearse in front of your peers, or you can also record yourself. All right. So focus on the timings, the transition, and the tone. Okay. Also understand preparation reduces anxiety. So the more you prepare, the more familiar you're with your material, the more confident you will feel. All right. And moving on to the last segment, which is active listening and interpersonal communication. So, what is active listening and interpersonal communication? Here, we will learn how to develop active listening techniques to improve team collaboration, all right, and effectively communicate data insights to stakeholders. Also, we're going to master the art of giving and receiving constructive feedback. Okay, so you also got to understand the importance of empathy and emotional intelligence in professional relationships. So, like I told you, let's start by exploring what active listening is and why it matters. So, what is active listening? It's the process of fully concentrating, understanding, responding, and remembering what someone says. Okay, so there are some techniques for mastering active listening. First would be paraphrasing. All right, now what do you mean by paraphrasing? You got to restate what the speaker said in your own words to confirm understanding. Let's say, for example, imagine a stakeholder stating, "We need the report by Friday to align with the marketing campaign." So your response could be, "So you need the report by Friday to ensure the campaign runs on schedule," right? So that is called as paraphrasing. All right. So you got to restate what the speaker said in your own words to confirm your understanding. Moving on, the next one is summarizing, right? So you would provide a brief summary of the key points you all discussed. So let's say an example could be, to recap, you're asking for a visualization of sales trends by region with a focus on past 6 months. Okay, so that is summarizing. So basically, you provide a brief summary of all of the key points that you discussed, and you ask clarifying questions. So you basically seek additional details to avoid misunderstandings, right? Now, a perfect example would be, when you say sales trend, do you mean the total revenue, or are you looking for trends in customer acquisition? Okay, so let your questions be clear and the responses you get be apt to your understanding. Okay, now if you ask, why is active listening important in a team collaboration? It helps to build trust and ensures everyone is on the same page. All right. And also, it reduces errors caused by miscommunication. So, I want you to think about a recent meeting that you may have had. All right. So, did you paraphrase or summarize during the discussion? And also, think about how it helped you, or if how could it have improved the outcome of the scenario or the meeting. All right. Now, the next one would be communicating with the stakeholders. So, what does it mean to communicate with the stakeholders? It's all about translating technical data insights into actionable business terms that align with your priorities. All right. there are some strategies which you can use. First would be to understand the stakeholders' needs. All right. Identify their goals and concerns before presenting the data. So let's say a marketing manager may care about customer acquisition metrics while a CFO would focus on cost efficiency, right? So you got to understand the needs of the stakeholders. And then you translate your data into business terms. Use simple language, right? And primarily focus on the outcomes. Let's say, example, instead of saying our clustering algorithm identified segments, say we identified 3 customer groups that require different marketing strategies. Okay. So try to translate your data into easily understandable terms. Okay. The third one would be to focus on actionable highlights. So highlight what a stakeholder can do with the data. Okay. An example could be by reallocating 10% of your ad spent to digital channels, you could increase the ROI by 15%. Okay. Now I want you all to pause and think of a time when you presented technical findings to someone without a technical background. Now tell me, how did you simplify your explanation? Or think about it. How did you simplify your explanation, or how could it have been simplified? All right. And the last one would be constructive feedback. What is constructive feedback? It is specific, actionable inputs aimed at improving performances or outcomes. Okay. Now you can use an SBI framework here. What is an SBI framework? You talk about situation, behavior, impact. All right. Situation is you describe a context. Let's say, for example, in yesterday's team meeting, something happened. And then your behavior would be to focus on specific actions and not the person. All right. Now, let's say you interrupted before others finish their points. Okay, so you're not pointing out the person here, but you're talking about the person's behavior. Okay, and then you'll talk about the impact lastly. Now you got to explain the result of the behavior. So the impact here could be this made it difficult for them to express their ideas fully. Okay, just because you interrupted in between, it made it difficult for them to express their ideas fully. All right. So moving on to the next one would be to receiving feedback. Please stay open-minded and avoid defensiveness when it comes to receiving feedback. Okay. Also ask clarifying questions. Now you can provide an example so I understand better. That would be a good clarifying question, right? So tell me, what is that one piece of constructive feedback you've received recently, and how did you respond to it? All right. So the last one is building professional relationships. What are professional relationships? They are connections built on trust, empathy, and effective communication. Now, there are certain ways to strengthen them, which I'm going to teach you all now. One, by networking strategies. All right. So you attend industry events and engage in online communities like LinkedIn. Okay. You initiate the conversation by showing genuine interest in others' work. And the next one would be to have empathy and emotional intelligence. What is empathy? It helps you understand the team members' perspectives and challenges. And emotional intelligence would be to enable you to navigate through the conflicts and build a rapport. All right. So let's say during the next meeting with your colleague or with your senior or with your peer, take a moment to acknowledge someone's contribution, right? A simple, hey, great point, can go a long way in building trust. Okay. Now, imagine if a stakeholder says, we need a dashboard that highlights monthly sales trend. How should your response be? So you can paraphrase by saying, you'd like a dashboard to show monthly sales trends, correct? Or you can also ask a clarifying question like, hey, would you prefer a detailed breakdown by region or just an overall trend line? Okay. So pause and practice paraphrasing. Or, on a recent request you received from a teammate, or it could also be from a professor or from a manager. All right. And moving on, this is an additional one which I would like to highlight for all of you here. Communication for data ethics. All right. So what is communication for data ethics? It's all about ethical responsibilities of data scientists when you're communicating insights. So here you will understand the importance of ethical communication in data science. You will learn how to avoid bias and ensure transparency in data visualization and analysis. Also, you will discover ways to build trust with stakeholders by explaining limitations clearly. All right. So let's begin by discussing why ethical communication is a vital aspect of your role as a data scientist. Let me tell you what is ethical communication. So it is the practice of presenting data honestly, transparently, and responsibly to ensure insights are accurate, unbiased, and actionable. Okay. So there are also some key principles here. First is avoiding bias in data visualization. Now, misleading visuals, it can distort the audience's understanding of the data, right? So let's say, for example, a bar chart without a consistent y-axis scale, it can exaggerate the differences. So always use consistent scales, appropriate chart types, and clear labels, all right? And then it would be transparency about assumptions and limitations. Now here, assumptions, it influences how data is interpreted. Being upfront about them builds trust. Okay. So let's say, for example, and your assumption could be, we analyzed customer behavior based on data from the past 6 months. And the limitations here could be, this analysis really does not account for seasonal fluctuations, right? So always try to include sections titled assumptions and limitations in your reports to ensure transparency. Okay. And the next one would be building trust with the stakeholders. So it means that you ensure that your audience understand the insights, the limitations, and the context of your analysis. Okay. So you can always start by explaining the limitations of the algorithm, right? So here, no algorithm can be, let's see, perfect. So try to be clear about accuracy, your bias, and also the potential errors. And then the the clarifying correlation with the causation. So correlation would show relationships, while causation implies event directly influences another one, right? So for example, let's say our data shows a correlation between higher ad spending and increased sales, but further analysis is needed to confirm causation. All right. So I'll give you a real-time example. Now, during the pandemic, some companies incorrectly attributed stock market trends to COVID-19 case numbers without considering the factors like government policies, investor sentiments, etc. So this highlights the importance of careful communication. All right. So imagine a stakeholder misinterpreting a correlation in your reports as causation. And how would you explain the difference to them? All right. So that would be your activity. And the next one would be practical demonstration. Now you're presenting a report on customer churn analysis. Here's how you will approach it, right? So you first highlight your transparency. Let's say this analysis uses data from the last year and assumes consistent customer behavior. Then you show honest visualization. You can use a bar chart with proper scaling to display churn rates by region. All right. And also you clarify correlation with causation. Okay. So now that we have come to the end of this, as data scientists, ethical communication is not just about a technical skill. Okay. So it is a responsibility that ensures the integrity of your work and builds trust with your audience. So by being transparent about assumptions, avoiding bias in visualizations, and clearly explaining your limitations, you not only elevate the quality of your insights, but also make them actionable and reliable. Okay. So always remember, ethical communication is what separates good data scientists from great ones. So try to practice these principles consistently, and you'll not only succeed in your role, but also contribute to a more informed and responsible use of data. So thank you all so much for being part of the session. Thank you.